run just a minute or two behind. The train helps by stopping right there in front of the tracks where we can't cross. Parks for a while, and then when it starts leaving, the next one comes along and slowly drifts by, and we'll sit there 10, 15 minutes. That happened tonight. But one way or another, we always seem to run a little bit late, somebody, somewhere, sometime, and that's just the way it is in life. I don't know if you got any announcement about Marvel Tinker. We did mention this morning that he had been taken to Memorial Hospital. I got a chance to visit with his daughter this afternoon a tiny bit when I went by and spoke to her. He was not recognizing our presence when we went by, but his condition is getting a little bit more serious. He's in room 6123 at Memorial Hospital, and so I'm sure the family would appreciate your prayers for him and as well as for them. I thought it would be good just to mention in the Sunday evening setting a tiny bit about the giveaway itself. For those that didn't get to be here, and I know a lot of you were here yesterday, but just about the vast majority of the people here at Central have participated in one way or another in this activity, helping organize, bring things in, invite people, etc., over the past several months. And by far, I think it was the best year we've ever had, not just counting the numbers of people, but also counting the quality of the people that seemed to come. They were very, very receptive of our being here. They were very cordial, very friendly, and so we really did enjoy having them here. To start with, when I got here very early in the morning, and I was just kind of excited about things and couldn't sleep, so I got down here a little extra early, just for the enjoyment of being with the people. And one of the family groups decided they would just bring sausage biscuits themselves and start passing them out to the people that were in the line. That started the ball rolling the right direction just in and of itself. And so there were over 30 people by the time I got here at 6:30, and of those people, they were already excited about what was happening. They were delighted the fact that somebody was encouraging and bringing food to them. And so that set the pace real well. By the time we opened the doors, they knew what was going on. We were kind in relating to them. And of course, we had, sitting right over here, you don't see anything now, but there was a large table with donut holes, etc. And several people from Central and college students and all chimed in together just to welcome the people. And it was a neat occasion. And a lot of people left with a lot of nice things and very receptive. We have some people visiting now with us here because of that, and we want to keep doing that. And there's a lot of follow-up that's going to come from that in the next few weeks. And so we're excited about that. As we've talked oftentimes, we want the neighborhood to see what's happening inside the building. And that only happens when we got attraction like that to bring them in for an excuse for them to come this way. And so we're pleased by all of those things. And so as they come in and visit on occasions, make sure you make all our visitors feel especially welcome. I think that would be very fitting for us as Christians. A friend of mine who's done mission work in the South Pacific for about 40 years now. When he first started out in the 1970s, I guess it was, Robert Martin said he was really concerned about this vast area where nothing had been going on, or very little had been happening. And one of the elders, seeing his, anxiousness about everything that was out there, and Robert at that time was going to be going by himself with his family, and no teamwork or anything like that, and he was venturing out into an area that was vastly untouched by the gospel. And one of the elders took him aside and said, "Robert, how do you eat an elephant?" Robert said, "Sir?" He said, "How do you eat an elephant?" He said, "I don't know. How do you eat an elephant?" He said, "One bite at a time." Robert thought for a second. Okay. He says, "You're not going to just get out there and just knock it all out all at one time." He said, "You're looking at this huge area of all these different island groups all over the South Pacific." And he said, "Take it one bite at a time." That's our journey in Christianity. That's the way we need to look at things too. And recognize, as we've sang the song already, He leadeth me, that God is guiding and directing and helping us along the way. So tonight I've got 3 small bites to live by in Christianity. I say small because of the fact of the size of the Bible verses. The first one is 1 Thessalonians 5:16. Give me just a moment. Almost forgot I brought my Greek interlinear here. Not that I'm eloquent in Greek by any means. But the reason I'm bringing it is because these, as far as I understand, are the three smallest Bible verses in the New Testament in Greek. And so the first is 1 Thessalonians 5:16. Pantos charites, always rejoice. In the Greek, it's 14 letters. It's a small bite. But it says a whole lot about us as Christians. The world looks on us a lot of times, sometimes in criticism. Sometimes, I guess, we somewhat deserve it. I say overall, because of how people have looked down on them and I guess in a very sad way, have said things that weren't kind. And that's not right for us to even think that direction, but it may be not right for them to think about us particularly that way, but nonetheless, it just happens. But a part of this is that they just don't see us being a happy people. And here as Paul is writing to this church, he gives this exhortation, always rejoice. Now, it wasn't because Paul was trying to create the image of we can always walk around with a great smile on our face because everything's going to be great. Once you become a Christian, you have no problems, you have all the money you need, you don't have any sicknesses. No, just the opposite of that. As Paul's writing oftentimes letters from within prison walls because Christianity was persecuted many places where he'd gone. And yet even from that perspective and from persecution perspective and from the fact that he'd gone sometimes without food and without things that we understand are things that are pretty much given or granted in life, Paul said, you always should be rejoicing. There's a spirit of Christianity. And now it's different than how we sing some of the kiddie songs and stuff, but it's something that goes down deep inside our heart. Even in spite of difficulties, there's something to rejoice about. Recognition of all the things that have gone on. Exodus chapter 15, verses 1 and 2 talks from a perspective of people having crossed the Jordan River. Or the Red Sea, rather. And when they get on the other side of the Red Sea, they do some rejoicing. Now, this was a moment especially for them. They'd been through a lot of grief in their history, but the horse and the rider, he, God, now threw into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my salvation. Now, we don't always ride in a victorious way. Sometimes we have some major difficulties that hit our life. But the Lord is always our strength and our salvation. There's always a reason to rejoice. If for no other reason, the hope of salvation that's ours. And that's basically the purpose and the focus we have, for reason for coming on Sunday morning, the reason for giving time, the reason for, as some world would say, giving away money. That's ridiculous. But we do that in this setting and any other place because of the fact we know that God wants us to be that way, that we have a home in heaven with Him out of all the things we do. 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 2, a very similar verse. It says, the Lord is my rock and my fortress, my deliverer, the God of my strength, in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge. Things don't always go good. Sometimes we have a life that's filled with a lot of grief. Maybe you've met some people and they haven't brought anything on themselves. It just happens. It's part of life. And yet I know someday when I leave this earth, at whatever age God calls me or when the Lord comes, because of God's promise, I have a home in heaven. Not because I do anything great, but because I serve a great God. So Paul does write from within prison when he writes the Philippian letter. In chapter 4, verse 4, twice he uses the word rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord most of the time. No, it says always. Rejoice in the Lord always. And I'm going to tell you again, he says, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm going to say it a second time because I don't know if you've got it. Rejoice. Now, it's good for us to do that. It's good because we communicate it, first of all, to ourselves, if we have the right attitude. But also, it's a reflection of what we need to do in encouraging one another within the church. And it's good for us. But because of all of that, too, the rest of the world is reminded that in spite of everything that doesn't seem to be going our way, there's a reason to rejoice. So rejoicing always. Second bite to chew on. Now the one you probably were aware of as being a small verse, John 11:35. This one has 16 letters in the Greek New Testament. Let's see, I know I highlighted it, so I could flip to it real quick, because it gets kind of, the print is rather small in my little interlinear here. Ed akaresin o Iesu. Or, as your translation probably says, Jesus wept. Now that is the smallest in the English translation, but it's the second smallest verse in Greek, 16 letters long. Second shortest Greek New Testament verse. Jesus wept. God feels our grief. We're exhorted as Christians to suffer with one another and rejoice with one another. But it's also nice to know that the God that created the heavens and the earth, that moves and changes, that hears our prayers, is so in tune to every emotional struggle I have. Occasionally, someone will speak to me and say, I know as a preacher you don't tell about your woes. You're always carrying those of other people. Not every other people, but all other people, or whoever needs it. And that's true. But I will always remind those people of God's feeling for their pain and His understanding and His hurt with them. God not only grieves, as we understand in Genesis 6, over the sin that we commit, because it causes a division between us, but He grieves just when we're hurting. And the occasion or the context of this Bible verse comes where Jesus is at a tomb and He is about to raise the person from the dead, and yet before He does so, He weeps. So He's not really weeping because Lazarus has died and He's missing him. He knows exactly where Lazarus is. But on that occasion, He's weeping for the people that are just hurting, particularly His two sisters, Mary and Martha, and anybody else that were friends of theirs that were around there. He was moved to compassion, as we talked about this morning, and it just welled up within Him, and He just cried for them. Even though in just a few moments, everything would turn around and He'd be excited and they'd be excited, but yet, for that moment, He looked out and He hurt. And God hurts. Even though, yes, down the road, when I leave this world, I'm going to go to heaven. I'll be rejoicing. God will be with me. I'll be with Him. We'll be rejoicing together. Yet before that time, when I have grief, God didn't say, okay, son, buckle up. You'll be okay because someday you're going to be in heaven with me. But rather, it hurts Him. And it struggles. His struggles are my struggles, and my struggles are His. And that's a great occasion for me, a great encouragement for me. In Genesis chapter 45, we're following along in there in the context of a story of a man named Joseph of the Old Testament, not the one that was Mary's husband, but one that goes a lot further back in time. And Joseph, in this occasion, finally is reunited with his brethren. Now, it's interesting how all this transpires, because if you know the story way back in chapter 38 and you follow along at the beginning of it, Joseph was not liked by his brothers. Matter of fact, they hated him. Eventually, they sold him into slavery, and they thought they were being nice to him because some of them wanted to kill him. But one of the brothers intervened, and so they ended up selling him, nonetheless. Joseph ends up being down in Egypt for a long time, and all of this, as you've read this story before, is all God's doing. And yet eventually, because of the great famine that's in that area, Joseph's brothers come down to Egypt for food, not knowing that Joseph by this time has become the one that is second under Pharaoh in charge of all the food that's distributed to all the people that are coming in need. So here's Joseph in the setting, and his brothers now, after so many years, comes into Joseph's presence. Now, he recognizes them because they hadn't changed a lick. He sees them all stacked together. Maybe one of them in a crowd he wouldn't have picked out. But here comes the brothers all together, and he said, oh yeah, I know these guys. But so many years have transpired for young Joseph, he's grown up, and they don't recognize him. In all likelihood, in addition to that, Joseph is speaking in another language. He's using an interpreter. So they don't think of him not being Egyptian. They think he's one of the Egyptians. Probably like if you've seen some of the pictures of the Egyptians way back when, has his face painted up. And so they have a way of knowing this is our brother. And so Joseph is just relating back and forth. And he does some little dealings and a little bit of game playing there in the process. And eventually, when they come back for the second time, he reveals himself. And I like what it says in chapter 45, verse 1. It says, Joseph could not restrain himself anymore. And he sent all the others outside of the room, and then he made himself known to his brothers. Verse 2 says, he wept aloud. And the Egyptians and all the people in the house, including the Pharaoh, heard it. And that was a time of rejoicing for him. What a neat occasion to see all these things transpiring. But every emotion that we ever go through, God is watching. All the struggles, all the pains, and all the innuences and unusual things that are going along there. John 11:35. 16 letters in the Greek New Testament. Bite number 2, Jesus wept. Number 3, you might find this one being unusual here, but 1 Thessalonians, back to chapter 5, where we started. Verse 16 was rejoice always. Next to it is pray without ceasing. Now, a lot longer in our English version, but the Greek New Testament has it with 22 letters. Pray without ceasing. Or it says here, aduda leptos proseukathe. Something similar to that. 22 letters. Now, I've got these highlighted. I'm going to leave this New Testament down here afterwards. If you'd like to flip it open and look at it there, you can see what they say there, just for curiosity's sake. Pray without ceasing. I don't know if we can ever emphasize enough how much the value of prayer is for our lives. It not only is a soothing thing for us to just speak out and know that God's listening, but it ought to sink down deep inside us that God cares, as we mentioned, Jesus wept, and God works on our behalf. I struggle as you do sometimes on the fact that I've prayed countless times for some things and God kept saying no. But I'm also reminded of what we talked about this morning in our Bible class, that in 2 Kings, that there's a story about Hezekiah. And this guy here, this king of Israel, prayed and God did some changing. Matter of fact, it changed God's mind about things. And God works on our behalf and hears our prayers. We should never stop praying. And literally that's what's being described here. It's just always praying. Christians ought to be an always praying people. Whenever you have just a moment, and you're driving down Amnicola Highway, for instance, you look up in the sky and you see the beauty and the majesty of what God's done, and you look up and it's just a glance away and you say, God, thank you. Or you're out in school and you're struggling with situations or at work or whatever, and you say, God, help me. In every situation, in every possibility, there's always a moment to say something to God, to remind ourselves that God is in control. That God directs, that God guides, that God leads. And sometimes God changes his mind if we'll just be consistent at that. Luke will pen in chapter 18 of his gospel a little bit of a precept on before Jesus actually says the word. So it says something about, Luke says, he says, and he told them this parable so that they might always pray and not give up. Literally is what's being described here. I find it interesting that Luke puts that in there as he puts that, because God is inspiring Luke to tell us that yes, we understand, God says, from my perspective, I see how many times you would like to give up on things because you think I'm not hearing, but God says you keep doing it because I do hear. And then the rest of the story is mentioned about how God does hear our prayers. And so Jesus tells the story after Luke gives the introduction, and both of them, being told by God, is telling us that God listens. When I had my youngest one in my arms sometimes, and I'd be carrying around, and here in the congregation in particular, and I'd be talking to different people, and she's right here, and she's saying, Dad, Dad. And she's trying to say something, but I'm not paying any attention to her. And I'm looking this way and that, and finally she grabs a hold of my chin, and she turns it toward her. She looks at me in the eyes, she goes, Dad. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about here. You don't have to do that with God. Just call out, Dad, in a very respectful way, Father. And He's listening. He doesn't have to be turned like parents do sometimes, because we're all tied up with so many other adult activities that aren't really that important to hear. God never looks at us as people that have such insignificant things that it's not worth listening to. But He always is in tune, always cares. Bite number 3, never stop praying. 3 bites to live on. Number 1, always rejoice, because it makes a difference for us and anybody else around us. So take the frown, throw it away as best you can. Sometimes you have to share some struggles and pains and things. Yeah, I understand that. But the fact is, we have something worth living for and worth dying for. Number 2, the God of heavens and the earth listens to our suffering and He feels those pains. Jesus wept. And number 3 then, pray without ceasing, because it matters. That makes it for us. We struggled with a lot of things this last week in serving and doing a lot of stuff. And as we're thinking about what do we do as a Christian, and how are we going to be able to reach out and to do all these things that we're willing to do and wanting to do, a bite at a time. Just a bite at a time. We can't do everything. We can be here, but we can't be everywhere. And sometimes we can't be all the things that are going on around here. That's just part of life. Plug in where you can and just take a bite at a time and allow the Lord to guide you. I hope these are some encouraging words for you, because I appreciate y'all so much. In all the things you do, and all the work you do, and all the giving you've done, you make a difference in this world. A great, great difference. And this light is not only shining inside the building, but it gets out. And we've got to keep doing that. It's our livelihood, and it's the important fact that as Christians, that's what God calls us to do. 3 bites to live on. Now tonight, as we close our lesson, and you look at your life, and you're having struggles, and you're needing some prayers, or you just kind of down and you're not sure that God really listens. Yeah, He does. Okay, I heard the lesson now. That just to remember. And if you need some special help tonight, a prayer, or you need to rededicate your life, or you've never been baptized into Christ, then you're missing out on the hope of salvation for that. And we don't want anybody to leave here without having that. So if you're ready to make that decision, we're ready to help.